Right, thanks for coming. Thank you for finding us. I never find these tea rooms. They're kind of a mystery to me. So what we're going to talk about today is Parkrun, and you might know that we've just done a large survey for Parkrun, which started out as a small pilot and ended up as this kind of monster that took us a year to write a report. So we've got 2 reports, one for Ireland and one for the UK, which I'm going to share with people. And I suppose the question that Parkrun wanted to know was, what is its impact as a physical activity intervention? The work we're going to describe is done by myself and Helen and Alice. Alice unfortunately can't be here today. She's off on a project. She's got herself a grant to go around the world looking for further clients. So it's really nice that it's a real kind of co-production between the 3 of us. So that's one of the first things I think I'd like to say. So I'm just going to remind you what Parkrun is. So that's a picture of Helen Parkrun in Cliff Park. And what you see there is from the top coming down to the bottom is kind of from beginning to end. And if you go stand at the front, then what you see skinny white males all with their watches out, ready to go, all getting desperate to shave a couple of seconds off. And as you go through and you see these different runs and different cohorts and different people coming through until they get to the end of a 5-kilometre free run, and they go and they register their barcode and get a time. So it's a free weekly timed run at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and it's just kind of exploded around the world. How it works is with that barcode, so you register with your barcode. Once you go through the finishing funnel, they have a little barcode reader, and they read your barcode. They also give you a little token as you pass through the finishing funnel. There's 100 people, there's 100 tokens. If you are 50th, you get a 50th token. You go and scan your barcode with that 50th token, and it assigns you 50th in that particular run. And there you go, and you can go and look yourself up on the internet because you've pre-registered and find yourself on the 50th out of 100. And you start to gather all these statistics. What it means is Parkrun starts to collect lots and lots of data about its users. And one of the things about Parkrun is that this part of it, this queuing element, is really, really important. And we said to Parkrun quite early on, we could kind of automate the whole system if you wanted. You could add a little mouse and you could run across the mouse. And this is no. This is really important because the social interactions that you get from the queuing group at the beginning and the end are all part of this social connectedness that make the whole thing work. That's part of the behaviour change process that Parkrun is kind of making happen. So Parkrun now has expanded across the world. Actually, it's slightly old. There's 20 countries. I don't know how many are on there. There's 20 countries around the world. The largest countries are these. So the UK was the first, and if you've just seen, it was the 15th anniversary this last weekend. Then we've got the next biggest is South Africa. It started much later, but it's absolutely huge and has the largest parkruns in the world. Thousands of people turn up to individual parkruns. That is a different beast to the one in the UK. And then, of course, we have Australia and Ireland as the next two biggest. So, on the back of Parkrun, we got to know them a few years ago, and we said we'd like to work out what the hidden ingredient of Parkrun is. What is it? If we could distill that and tell people what those ingredients are and apply them to other interventions that are kind of population level, population size, then we could create, we could do some great things with public health of this country and around the world. And in fact, Parkrun's mantra is improving the health and happiness of the world. So they want a healthier, happier planet, even though it started out as basically a timed run for Paul St. Hewitt and his mates down in Bushy Park. So we became the Parkrun, the lead of the Parkrun Research Board. It existed already. It kind of went a bit fallow for a while. We then took it over in 2000 15, 16, something like that. And we now run that. And Alice has been very effectively administering that. And basically what we do is we take in research proposals from around the world. We do the classic academic review process, make sure it's got some ethics, and then say, yes, you can do it, and they can apply it to the Parkrun cohort. But we're also trying to lead research as well, be a little bit more proactive. And that's the stage we're at now. So we've got some results here, and Helen's going to tell you about another project in a minute, where she'll tell you about some of the results. And we want to make those available to just kind of promote research for Parkrun. And so we can supply some very good opportunities for you lot and anyone who's listening to this. Just a quick kind of note some of the stats about Parkrun. So if you look at how it's grown over the last few years, this is what you see. So you've got males, got females. This is the number of, I think it's participants. Participants and you have them somewhere. And this is segmented into the different activity levels. When people register with Parkrun, what they do is you put your name, address, postcode, whatever, but there's also a single activity question. It's not the best question in the world, but it does identify actives and inactives. And it says how many times you do any physical activity in the last 4 weeks of at least 30 minutes or more per week. And if less than 1, so if you do less than 1 a week, then that's inactive. About 1, about 2, about 3, 4 or more. So unfortunately it gets truncated, so it goes less than 1, 1, 2, 3, 4 or more. It would have been nice to go 4, 5, 6, 7, but that's not how it worked. And they kind of got that question code into their registration documents, and they've been collecting that for many, many years. So I suspect we're stuck with it, really. So what you see is you see inactives in terms of the number of participants with time. All of them are going up, as you might expect. And here you can see that the inactives are the lowest proportion, the kind of almost actives are the next, and then the 2s are the next, the 3s and then the 4s, and that's females and males. And as you get some subtle differences, you get slightly more greater than 4s for males than females. You can see this is the number of participants taking part per week, new participants per week. Okay, so you can see this kind of funny scatter in the data, but that's actually, you can see the effects of Christmas, New Year, Easter, coming back after the summer holidays, May bank holiday. It's all in the data in that kind of time series. And if I was to look at previously inactive males, you can see the effect. And basically, this drop here is the pre-Christmas drop, and then this peak here is the post-Christmas peak, and then it drops down again. And actually, you can kind of almost cover those bits up, and you just get a straight line going through all of that. So you get these amazing patterns, and one of the things it's showing us is actually that this data is more or less big data. We get to the levels of big data where if you see something that's not repeated, and it's just a singular, it's usually because you made a mistake in your spreadsheet.
Is that the same in the Southern Hemisphere countries?
It's a very good question, and I don't know the answer. That's a really good question. Ben's not here, but one of our projects we want to do is the effect of Christmas and New Year, and we want to kind of look at both. But I think what you see is you see the effect of holidays, you see the effect of fasting and not fasting. There's these kind of things going on. So we've got 20 countries to work on, so good question. And then if you look at different parkruns, this is just different parkruns. This one is Bushy, this is the original parkrun. This is the number of participants for Bushy parkrun growing, and they're getting, again, this is quite old now, so they're up here. They're all kind of grown. Sheffield, Helen is in there somewhere, Castle is somewhere down here. So we've got data for lots of different individual parkruns. One of the things we know the where they are, we know the index of multiple deprivation for all our participants, or most of our participants, and we know the index of multiple deprivation for the actual venues themselves. So we have the opportunity to look at all sorts of different factors on participation at Parkrun. So that's the introduction to Parkrun and where we're at. And I will hand over to you.
Very much. So I'm just going to introduce or give an overview of an evaluation we did on one of the Parkrun initiatives called Prof. Just going to give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what was quite a complex evaluation. So, like Steve said, Parkrun's kind of mission statement is to create a healthier, happier planet. It's ambitious, but given that they've grown as fast as they have, and the kind of worldwide, then it's not completely unrealistic ambition to have. And they want to break down barriers to physical activity, volunteering and things, by bringing people from all different backgrounds and abilities to parkruns. But what they've kind of realised is that by virtue of having this kind of organic growth, and they kind of promote themselves through word of mouth, that they've unintentionally perhaps the different disabilities and people from different ethnic backgrounds and things are perhaps underrepresented. So what they've realised is that in order to reach that ambition, they perhaps need to be more strategic in the kind of promotion and things like that. So that's where the Prove project came about, and Prove was all about improving the access to Parkrun for people with disabilities and long-term health conditions. It was some funding they received from the Department of Health, and they just were implementing this one in England, and it was essentially around removing barriers to participation in Parkrun and enhancing the experience that people were having of Parkrun. So they kind of had two different population groups that they were targeting. One was the existing parkrunners, so in all those hundreds and thousands of parkrunners, there was bound to be groups of people with long-term conditions, and then it was also about bringing people from outside of the parkrun in, so kind of doing that more outreach type of things. So with our relationship and our partnership with the AWRC, we were kind of commissioned to do the independent evaluation of that, and essentially it was to do kind of an impact and process evaluation. What we kind of realised early on that this was kind of a real world intervention. It was dynamic. It wasn't necessarily well set out in that we kind of had a baseline and a follow-up, and that we could kind of implement lots of nice, neat data collection periods. We had to be really pragmatic and flexible because it was something that was constantly changing. We didn't necessarily know what the intervention was when we kind of developed the evaluation plan, which was quite difficult because this was something that was quite a new thing for Parkrun, and they were essentially just seeing what works really. Baselining was a challenge, so anyone that's done the evaluation will know the importance of having a baseline. And given that this was a very dynamic project, and Parkrun kind of started it, and we kind of tried to follow and collect a baseline, it was quite tricky, but in a way it kind of made it quite exciting. And given that this is a really dynamic system, and Prove was just one part of this whole system of what Parkrun is, it was always going to be really difficult to attribute any change to Prove, especially outside of kind of a rigorous experimental design. But we gave it a go. So just to give a bit of an idea of what it was we were trying to capture, Prove involved targeting different health conditions. So what Parkrun did was that they appointed volunteer outreach ambassadors to represent a number of different condition groups. So over the 3-year project, they brought on different health conditions. They recruited volunteer outreach ambassadors who were either people with a lived experience of the condition, or a carer, or maybe someone with a specialist role or professional interest in it. And these outreach ambassadors essentially had the freedom to go out there and do what they thought was best, really, to engage with people with long-term conditions and bring people into Parkrun. So I think that's what made it quite challenging for us as evaluators, is that it was essentially up to these outreach ambassadors to do whatever they wanted, really. And that kind of is what Parkrun's all about. It's all about the volunteers, and it's about empowering them to kind of keep this thing alive. So although there was differences between the different conditions, so some health conditions did different things than others, generally across all the groups there was some Facebook groups set up and they kind of were attracting a growing number. So we, as an evaluation team, we tried to capture the numbers of Facebook members and kind of to capture what that experience was for the people in those groups. The outreach ambassadors wrote accessibility guidelines, so this was around trying to increase awareness of different long-term health condition groups amongst the individual Parkrun events teams. Some new volunteer roles were created, so for example in the deaf and hard of hearing group, they reached out to the Parkrun community and said what are the barriers for you, and it was really apparent that one of the main barriers to engaging fully with Parkrun was that they couldn't hear the pre-event announcement. So that's the event director would stand at the front every Parkrun. They usually do a few, they say, give a few health and safety if there's any kind of obstruction on the course or anything like that. And it's what makes it quite a homely experience in that you've got this kind of engagement at the beginning of every event, but people who are deaf or hard of hearing couldn't hear that. So what they did was they developed a new volunteer role where people can get a volunteer point for being a sign language supporter at every event. So things like that meant that there was different interventions happening for different groups, and there was lots of other activities like blog posts, features in newsletters, easy read leaflets for kind of people with learning disabilities. So a whole host of different things, and so through the evaluation we just kind of had to capture how these were being implemented and how they were being received. So we did that through surveys, interviews, so mainly looking at them processes through qualitative interviews with parkrunners, the outreach ambassadors, parkrun staff, just to try and get this idea of how it was being received, and as far as we could, the impact. So in terms of what we found then, through kind of the surveys that we did, respondents with long-term conditions already kind of perceived Parkrun as a very supportive thing, and this was even before Prove. So that kind of begged the question of how much potential was there to kind of increase the increase the experience. There were some interesting differences between different health condition groups. So like I said, the people with deaf and hard of hearing had some unique kind of needs, which other condition groups didn't. We implemented a quarterly survey which was trying to capture the prevalence of long-term health conditions. So one of the main difficulties we've had with capturing a baseline is that we didn't actually know at the beginning how many parkrunners there were who had a long-term health condition. So we implemented a quarterly survey to try and capture that information, and what we found, it didn't really change over the course of Prove, but again, how realistic was it to expect a big change to happen over the course of a project, especially given that this was a volunteer-led thing that was quite low resourced. The ambassadors and volunteers and parkrunners all really saw the value in Prove and the value of the outreach ambassador role, but interestingly from the Parkrun point of view, there was concerns around the sustainability of that. So for Parkrun, having to sustain this network of over 80 volunteer ambassadors was a challenge for them. So they've had to reflect on that and think how realistic is this for us as an organisation. But what they have done is learn an awful lot about how to engage with long-term condition groups, and they've used all the findings to inform different initiatives. The Facebook groups, they've continued to be in place after Prove because we demonstrated that they were really supportive for the people involved in them. So people sharing experiences, advice, people being encouraged to go to Parkrun through those social support groups. The blogs and the videos and takeover events, they were all perceived as being a really good idea, but it begs the question of who was actually engaging with them. And I think it seems like everyone that's really engaged with Parkrun was engaging with them, but how do outside of the parkrun bubble. And one thing that really seemed apparent was in order to get outside of that parkrun bubble, it was important to try and engage with charities and healthcare professionals, because that was kind of the gatekeepers into the wider community of people living with long-term health conditions. But what the outreach ambassadors found was that that was really challenging to approach these big organisations, so say British Heart Foundation or kind of Alzheimer's and different charities. How to get the foot in the door with those charities was really hard. So again, Parkrun have kind of reflected on that and are thinking about how they can do that, and they've got another scheme called Parkrun Practice, which is actually working with healthcare professionals in primary care. So all these findings have really informed different initiatives. So in terms of lessons learned from the evaluation and proof then, the project goals need to be realistic, measurable and specific. It's difficult to demonstrate impact when you don't have those kind of measurable objectives, so there was the intention to increase the number of people, and yet we struggled to actually capture that. Communication channels and how to actually target the people that benefit the most. So it's about going outside of Parkrun and how to get to the wider world. Being realistic about the potential for change and how much you can really expect of a volunteer cohort. How to capture exposure, so that was really difficult in that lots of things were going on, but we didn't really know who was engaging with them and who was receiving them. And the importance of learning and sharing learning. So what we as an evaluation team are trying to do is write some publications for this and work with Parkrun in order to share some of the learnings from Prove, because although it's perhaps wasn't as successful as Parkrun had hoped, there's actually so much that they've learned, and we're going to work with them to communicate those findings, because there's so much that kind of healthcare professionals could learn, social prescription. So yeah, we've also got the Proof report, which is publicly available, so if anyone wants a link to that, that's on the slides. And I'm just going to introduce the Health and Wellbeing Survey before...
Sorry Helen, before we go on to this, because we'll probably dive into this, has anyone got any questions for Helen before we go on to the survey about the Prove project and long-term conditions in Parkrun? Otherwise we'll just shoot ahead.
So, the long-term conditions, can you go back a couple of slides just to remind me?
Do you want to know which ones they are?
No. Back one more. Respondents with long-term conditions from Parkrun and supporting the welcome before Prove.
Yeah.
Was from my understanding, there was people that were organically in the cohort,
Yeah.
and then there was people who recruited through the volunteer network. Was there any differences in their perceptions of Parkrun? So the people who were already existing in that bubble and people who came into it.
So that was not something we could capture.
Okay.
So when there was no way of us knowing who was a new Parkrunner with a long-term condition.
Okay.
And it's something that we have, so when you register with Parkrun, you provide some details like name, date of birth, and maybe home Parkrun, something like that.
Yeah.
But they don't ask for ethnicity, they don't ask for whether you've got a health condition or anything like that. So one of our recommendations was that if that page had captured some extra information that they could really start to monitor and evaluate. So say if they had a thing that said, how did you hear about Parkrun? And they said, oh, my doctor told me about it. Then that would be really informative for Parkrun to know how people are coming in. So yeah.
Can I ask, how long did they actually provide the support for? How long did it prove?
It was a 3-year project. So they had funding for 3 years, and then it kind of came to an end. But I think Parkrun's point of view is that it's part of a bigger series of work that they're doing, engaging
plus 80 additional support workers. That was across all the parkruns in the UK.
So the Health and Wellbeing Survey, get back into this. So this was about turning anecdotes into data. So last year, I think it was, the World Health Organization kind of said in the physical activity report that Parkrun was an example of a free community physical activity initiative, which is really good for Parkrun in that it's kind of being recognised globally as an intervention that could be used as an example. But what Parkrun haven't had is that kind of data to support. So there's so many anecdotes, and if you saw any of the news over the weekend about how Parkrun has grown and the impact it's had on the people that take part, it's clear that there's something going on here, but we've not yet got kind of this big database and evidence to support it. So we took that on as another challenge to see what we could do in order to support Parkrun in providing that evidence. So the Health and Wellbeing Survey was designed, so the survey itself was designed by us, but it used kind of validated and, as far as we could, kind of global measures of health and wellbeing. So just before Steve gives you some of the insight into what it found, I just wanted to give an overview of what some of the measures were. So we captured demographics, because like I said, in the registration data, we don't get a lot about who is participating. So before this survey, we didn't know an awful lot about the different ethnicities or the different long-term health conditions. So we collected some of that, and we asked what their participation type was, so that we could break it down by whether they were volunteers only, or whether they were runners or walkers, or whether they did both. We asked them about their life satisfaction and happiness and physical activity level. So we actually asked 3 different versions of the activity question, because one, we wanted to compare different measures, and to, like Steve mentioned earlier, the registration question it has its limitations, so we asked the IPAC and the single item question as well. We asked their motives for first participating in Parkrun. We did EQ5D, which hopefully will enable us to do some health economic analyses. Healthcare usage, so use of GPs and A&E, things like that. Mental well-being, perceived impact of Parkrun, and also social interactions and relationships at Parkrun, so asking them who do they interact with, who do they go with, in order to learn more about the kind of social capital side of things.
Right, so we sent it out to all Parkruns who registered in October 2018, and we got back, well, we actually got back about 100,000 UK survey returns. 40,000 people kind of clicked consent so they could have see what was inside. I had a look inside and I'm not doing that. So about 40,000 people consented but then didn't fill anything in. And then we got about 60,000 plus who actually filled it in, and the majority filled it all in. And it was a pretty arduous survey actually. It's 47 questions, and in-depth things like IPAC. If you've ever filled out an IPAC questionnaire, that's just an ache. That is just horrible. So we got 60,694 from the UK. We also sent out the same survey across Ireland, and as much newer, much smaller cohorts of Parkrun, about at least a tenth the size, and we got 4,400 survey returns. So, okay, this is the data. So I'll just show you the Parkrun survey. Sorry, you cannot see that. That tells you how many registrants there were, 2,200 registrants at that date. This one tells you 100,000 responses, 99,500 gave their consent, 60,694 completed. So we've gone from 2 million down to 60,000. So then we mapped it back to what they'd filled in at registration many years ago, or last week, depending when they registered, gender. So we managed to match 49,000 to gender, and we had more females than males, and that actually matches Parkrun. Parkrun has more females than males now. Deprivation index. So when you fill out your postcode, you can use your postcode to match back to a thing called index of multiple deprivation, which is a composite of all sorts of different socioeconomic factors about your area. So it's a population measure. It's not really an individual measure, but if you have enough people, it can represent that population. So we got 47,000 people where we know the deprivation index. And Parkrun splits it up into quartiles. So in terms of the most deprived quartile, we've got 4,500 people from the most deprived quartile of deprivation. And you can kind of see that it goes up, so that as you get to the least deprived, you get 40% of people. And that kind of matches the Parkrun population as well. And then, as Helen said, we split it up into participation status, whether a runner walker volunteered, or just a volunteer. And about 2/3 runners walkers volunteer, runners walkers, about a third run walked and volunteered, and then a tiny proportion were just volunteers, so 681. Now, I have to add, we also had some others who filled it out. So we had a small number of about 1 to 2,000, which we haven't even looked at yet, of people who registered for Parkrun but had never participated. So we have people who filled out the full, about 1,500 people of people who've never done Parkrun who still filled out the survey. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing what's in there, particularly the comments. But if anyone wants to have a look at that and help us with that, that'd be great, because there's just too much data and not enough time. So physical activity, we talked about physical activity levels earlier on. So the less than ones, we had 2,300 from that category, approximately 1s, 2s, 3s, 4 or more. So we split them up. And if you look at the demographic in terms of age, respondents' age, it was 16 plus, so the survey was only 16 plus. This is what the Parkrun population looks like. Actually, if you come down further, I wish I'd shown it actually. If you come down further, what happens is this pops out up to about 12. So at the age of 12, so this is age, this is the registrants. It pops out so that it's a peak at 12 and then drops down again and starts at 4. So the peaks are actually, for the population, are at 4 at about 30 to 40. And this is the family effect, kids and mums and dads pushing their kids in prams and things like that. This is what our population for the survey looked like. It's slightly different, slightly peakier, had a slightly older mean than the survey. But if we wanted to do some kind of biasing in the data, we've got enough data that we could do that. If we looked at this activity question and compared it to the survey, so the light ones are the actual Parkrun population, the dark ones are the survey. So what you see is less than 1, you get this small proportion, about once a week, about twice a week, the most is about 3 times a week, and then 4 or more is slightly less. And it follows the Parkrun population. It's not too bad. It kind of follows the Parkrun population. So we're almost happy that we could use the data to represent the activity levels of Parkrunners at registration. And then in terms of index of multiple deprivation, one thing that's very interesting is, whichever one of these you choose, the lighter one is the UK full population, and this one is our sample population. Quite similar, but really a linear straight line for both of those, from most deprived to least deprived. That's kind of what you're seeing. We asked the question about motives as well. What were your motives for signing up for registering for Parkrun? And to be honest, this is the best way I can just show it. Fitness, health, and a sense of personal achievement in doing a 5 kilometre. That's what most people said. But there are other things, weight loss was one, but that was interesting, that was quite a long way down the list. So we asked people their motives, and people gave us up to 3 responses out of a total of 21. And that needs analysing. So, key findings, let's jump straight onto the key findings. So one of the first findings was previously inactive people is the one that everyone's interested in. So previously inactive survey respondents reported an increase in activity following registration at Parkrun. So, and I'll show you the graph using the single question physical activity question. So this question was, how many days of activity did you do last week of 30 minutes or more. 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's much better. We can do some numeric analysis on this. So this is people that said, I did less than 1. I was previously inactive when I registered for Parkrun, and this is what they're doing now. So these are the ones that are still previously inactive. So you've got about 10 or 11% that are still effectively inactive. They're saying, I'm doing nothing at the moment. Or last week, I did nothing. So that means we've got about 89% that are doing something. So the mode is 2, and you've got some doing 7 days a week. So you've got some people doing significant amounts of activity. I think of myself as inactive, and I kind of come in about here, and I think I'm doing loads. So there's lots of people here from the previously inactive community who are now remarkably active. We do have males versus females, and you can see some differences there. You tend to see that males like to claim that they do more days per week. I should add, this is all self-report, by the way. So males claim they do more, maybe females are a little bit more realistic about what they do and claim they do fewer days per week. So in this cohort, we've got 2,300 in this cohort, a median of 2.4 days a week, and a median of 2 days a week. So that's the first thing that we found, which is quite interesting. One of the other things we found was that parkrunners now do activity outside of Parkrun. So I'm going to show this because I love this analysis. I know Helen and Alice were really nervous about this piece of analysis because there's quite a few assumptions in the way you have to do it. Because, of course, we have a cross-sectional study. We haven't got a longitudinal study. So we're having to do some inferences here, which I can go into the detail of. But if we look at this graph, we look at what we have. We have these white bars. And these numbers here are best estimates of the number of days of activity that these different activity groups did at registration. So the less than ones, actually 35 days per year. Okay, so that is less than 1, it's not 52, because that would be 1, and what that would be 1. So it's 35. So on average, okay, those who are doing less than 1, we're doing already about 35. The 1's about 74, the 2's 115, 164, and the greater than 4's do about 207 days of activity a year. So that's what they were already doing. And what the data shows, the next bit on these bars, are the number of parkruns they're doing per year. And this is just for runners and walkers. So these runners and walkers are now doing between, 9 and 12 parkruns per year. And then the last bit on the bar chart is the additional bit, because they're telling us how many days of activity they're doing a week. So if you go back to what I said a minute ago, 2.4 days a week, that equates to about 118 things a year. So the key thing about this is that these inactives might have been doing up to kind of 35 things per year anyway. They're now doing 11 parkruns, and they're doing 72 things outside of Parkrun. And that's to me is important. So it's not all Parkrun, it's other things that are happening. And this is the added value that Parkrun is doing. It's signposting people off to these other activities. And what you see is, okay, it diminishes as the people who are already active. But actually there's still an added benefit. There's something else going on. It doesn't matter how active you were, everyone has shifted to the right. Everyone's doing more activity post-registration with Parkrun, or they're claiming they are. In terms of health and well-being, we asked this question, thinking about the impact of Parkrun on your health and well-being. To what extent has running or walking at Parkrun changed? Okay, we then asked 15 health and well-being outcomes. You know, how has it changed your physical health, your mental health, and so on? And they did give answers of much worse, no impact, better, or much better. And to just make it simple, what we've said is, what we've done is we've put together the better and much better and said how many said better and much better. So if everyone said better and much better, the answer is 100%. If nobody said better and much better, it's 0. So, and the key numbers were in these 3 categories. We did get some saying much worse and worse, very tiny numbers, which we need to go back and investigate. But the majority were these 3, no impact, better or much better. So the key finding is that large numbers of respondents reported improvements in their physical and mental health. And if I show you, this is all respondents, this is everyone that answered that question, 56,000 of them. And if we just go back to the motives, 56% said improving fitness, 37% said physical health, and 27% sense of personal achievement. They were the three main motives for doing something. And so if we look at those in terms of fitness is quite high up, sense of personal achievement was the highest, about 90% improved, their sense of personal achievements was improved. And what was the other one? Physical health, 85% said that their physical health had improved. So we've got some really interesting, large changes in people's perception of their health. Got some interesting things, time spent with family actually wasn't that high, and some people have said it had got worse, and that's because they were doing Parkrun. So, so some interesting kind of conundrums going on there. And the upshot of all of this is that people reporting, a large proportion of them reporting that their happiness had gone up. If there's a measure of quality of life, happiness has got to be it. So a large portion of people saying that happiness had got better or much better as a consequence of running or walking at Parkrun. What we did find is that the improvements were more prevalent in those who were previously active. So if you look at the lighter ones were the previously active, or there's the darker ones. So the dark ones is what you've just seen. I've just added on the previously inactives now. And you can see for the previously inactives, the proportions are higher in many of the of those bars. So those who are previously inactive are finding more health and wellbeing benefits from participating in Parkrun than the full cohort. The numbers are quite low. What we need a really good statistician to start looking at this and going, right, this is exactly what is significant, this is what isn't. Because you see some close together, is that significant or not? We've not done the stats, so I couldn't tell you. And then more respondents who ran or walked and volunteered at Parkrun reported benefits than those who just walked. So if we just do a comparison between runners and walkers who volunteer, so green is just runners and walkers, and blues are runners and walkers who volunteer. And what you see is the blue bars, I think on every one of those, on every one of those are longer than the green bars. So if you're colourblind, the bottom ones are the blue bars. So what we're seeing is that runners and walkers who volunteer get more benefit from participating in Parkrun than runners or walkers. It's not necessarily showing causation because it's a correlation. What we also find is that runners and walkers who volunteer have been registered with Parkrun for longer, have done more Parkruns than those who just run a walk. They engage more with people, so they are the keeny beanies of Parkrun. So we might just be seeing an effect that this particular cohort is really keen and is really keen to tell us about it in a survey. So we've got to be a little bit careful with that. But it does seem that that cohort is just a really keen cohort. So I just said that. So not far from the end now. So those who volunteered without running had many of the same benefits of those who run and walked, and it shows that volunteer alone can be of benefit. So now, bear in mind, we've only got 604 volunteers answered this question, 20,000 walkers volunteered. But what you see is in the kind of the lower bars, the pink bars, which are the volunteers, very similar findings to the runners and walkers who volunteer. The numbers of volunteers. So I'll finish off by just commenting that we also had, at the end of every survey, you say, well, is there anything else you'd like to tell us? And 14,000 people filled it out. So we have 14,000 sets of goals. And these are not just, oh, thank you, or God, that was long. These are essays. We have got essays. And I've called this bit Births, Deaths and Marriages. And what I did is I just looked through the comments and I just put birth in to see what came up, and I put death in to see what came up, and I put marriage in to see what came up. And these are just some of the comments that came up. And these are typical. I looked at a few. And this is just like, well, I'll just let you read these. you find yourself crying when you read some of these things? So we've got 14,000 sets of comments like that. Those are a bit long, but they're not always that long. But in terms of it, there's a thematic analysis, desperate to be done. We can segment how we want it to. There's all sorts of issues coming out of these comments, and in fact, this is where we'll probably end up going. I mentioned there are some who said that the impact of Parkrun is worse and much worse. They're tiny numbers, but they could be the tip of something that we don't quite understand. So we need to really go back to that to find out and just make sure there's not something going on that we don't want to happen. So that's the way we'll do it. So again, if anyone's interested in that, that'd be really good. The analysis went out last week as a press release over the 15th anniversary. Got a little bit lost in the 15th anniversary celebrations. But we'll be going out shouting these numbers, and this is the graphic they came up with. Effectively 91% had a sense of personal achievement, 89% said their fitness improved from participating, nearly 5% said their physical health had improved, 79% said that they were happier, and I think an interesting one, 69% reported that their mental health had improved, and that's a really key topic at the moment. So finishing off, then these are questions to kind of think. Anybody want to write a paper, because we've got more data to stick out, or do a research project on the data, which you probably have to do before you write a paper anyway. Thematic analysis, these are just off the top of my head of things. We've just got the data in from a longitudinal study. So what we did when we did the cross-sectional survey in October, we did a parallel study where we asked almost the same questions of new registrants only. And then we've just asked the question 6 months on and just got the data back. We've managed to match it back to get 456. I can't remember what it was like, 4,000. We managed to match so many filled it out. We managed to match so many. So we've got 456 that we've got 2 time periods. Not all those questions, but majority of those questions, and they're adapted to make sense. So we've got a longitudinal survey to analyse if anyone's interested in that. We also have Parkrun's doing a looked at runner study where they collect their own data, and Helen's done a great job in working out if we can use the data. It looks like we can. So from an ethics and a GDPR point of view, we can use the data, and they ask questions of parkrunners. What I haven't said is if of 3 million people that registered at Parkrun, about 2.2 million actually turn up. So you lose about a third. About 2/3 turn up and you lose about a third. And then you lose numbers all the way along, so the numbers that they've repeatedly come back and so on. So something like 40% of those who participate do 1 parkrun, 35% do 2, and so on. You get this nice kind of exponential decay up to 52 runs per year. So there's this interesting thing going on. What we've got in this reluctant runners study, we've got a survey going out to those who registered but have never turned up, and those who've done 1 parkrun and never come back, and asking them the questions: what are your barriers to participation? Why are you not turning up? What is it? Whatever. And Parkrun would like us to do some analysis on that. Health conditions. What's not been mentioned is 1 in 10 of participants in the survey had a health condition, some long-term condition of 12 months or more. And the average was about just under 2. So they had, on average, 2 health conditions, those who responded. So the chief health conditions were arthritis. About 2% of all respondents had arthritis. Just under 2% of all respondents had depression, and that's a long-term condition of 12 months or more. Anxiety was about 1.4%, I think. And then we've got a whole list of conditions. I think people with cancer is about 0.6% of the Parkrun populations appear to have a cancer of some sort. So we've got these health conditions, and again, we could segment in any way. And, okay, if you think of a question, it's probably there. So, I'd like to thank Helen and Alice for doing an immense amount of work. It's taken us a year to get to this stage. but now I think we're in a good place and we can start exploiting it. So if anyone wants to come on a journey, please join us. Thank you.
I think we have a few minutes for questions if there are some.
Firstly, Steve, thanks so much. Fantastic presentation. I'm really excited with the data that you've collected, huge amounts and so many different ways to analyse it. So I'll just ask one quick question, but I've got plenty. Have you thought about, or are there any plans to look at the increases in participation based upon an interactive effect of their physical activity levels and indices of multiple deprivation? Because I think the chart you produced with the 4 different elements of indices is fascinating, but I wonder whether you'll see some changes based upon a combination of both people that are traditionally not as active but come from the first predominant sort of lower social economic status.
Yes, absolutely. I think the first paper will probably write will probably be about inactives because there's a lot there to write. And then I think that's one axis. The next axis is we'll look at deprivation, the effect of deprivation index. And then of course, then we want to start looking at that's crossover. And probably the crossover is this inactives, most deprived. And I don't quite know how big that square is. Is it a quartile? Is it a decile? Is it a whatever? So yes is the answer, and the quicker we can get to analyse it, the better as far as I'm concerned. So if you want to come down, that's great. So yes.
Oh, thanks, Steve. I think again for the presentation is really interesting. Maybe push me towards doing a parkrun at some point.
You can volunteer.
Yeah. In terms of the longitudinal study, you said at the start how you can relate it back to individual. So you have your individual barcode that you go back to.
Yes.
Is it possible to link those to that barcode so you could maybe look at maybe a change in aerobic fitness judged by 5 kilometre time in those longitudinal parts?
Yeah. We have everybody's run times. So we have the number of runs and we have the run time of every run that they've done.
Okay.
So yeah, we can do that.
So that'd be really interesting to look at how the aerobic fitness kind of as a marker changes with all those different.
That would be good. Yeah, and different cohorts. That'd be great. Males, females, young, old, deprived, not deprived, inactive, active. That'd be good. Yeah, we can do that. So we have reports. So I don't know how to distribute them, but we do have a full report.
You've got another question, John.
Yeah, I found myself most fascinated by the volunteer group, actually. And you had a slide where you showed, I think it was the health indicators, or I can't remember what you called it.
Yeah, the health impact,
But you mentioned at the time you got sort of similar profile in the volunteers. And
yes.
Is it the same in terms of the effect on physical activity? So
No. And actually, I just looked at that graph and I thought, so as I was saying those exact words, I'm thinking, those bars don't look right. And I do remember that I found a graph that had scrambled the order, and I think that might be it. So, I'm not going to go back to that graph, and I'll share it if you want to tomorrow. But yes, in fact, what I remember is those who volunteered, only about 30% said that their physical fitness had improved. It was something like 30%. Whereas Runners, Walks and Volunteers, it was huge. It was quite a large number. It was, like 80% or something.
Because I was also thinking about, you mentioned you could assess. I was interested in what your thoughts about the bias and what potential approaches. And looking at any biases that go.
Well, one of the things I've started to look at in the data is if you look at how many park runs the average park runner has done, and you can go on the web and see this. So you can look at all the stats on the website, and if you divide the number of park runners by the number of runs, you get to about 4. Okay, so over all time, the average number of park runs per person is about 4. So if you take that, and you can take measures like that, and you can work out what the average age is, so you can start biasing the data. So what I've started to do is look at the data and look at some of the findings of the data, and limit the number of park runs. So if our average of runs and walkers was 11 park runs per year, so significantly more active. So if I cut out the more active park runners to bring the average down to the parkrun population average, what happens to those impacts? So that's one of the ways I'm looking at doing it, is kind of trying to match the number of parkruns, the number of years of registration to the population. So it's not just the key beanies. So that's what we need to do. We've got enough data we can do that. So if anyone's got any thoughts on that, we've just got to figure out how do we do that? How do we get this population and select them so that they're a bit more like the parkrun population?
Any last question if they've got one?
I assume you've got some data, so any insights on how many people walk or run to a parkrun and how many get by, or how people get to a parkrun and how many are local to a parkrun compared to how many come in from outside of the city? With this we don't. So those of you who know Jeff Green, who's Emeritus Professor here, we've just done the writing a paper look at the difference between Helen Parkrun and Castle Parkrun. So Castle Parkrun's on the Manor, in a really deprived community, IMD of 1, decile of 1, and Helen. And what we've done is we have looked at the travel distances of parkruns to each parkrun, the catchment areas that they come from, etc. Whether they come from in town, out of town, and so on. So at Helen Parkrun, which is nice, leafy suburb, nice park, about 2/3 come from around the park and its immediate catchment area. At Castle, only about 1/3 come from the surrounding area and its immediate catchment area, and 2/3 come from further away, come from outside, kind of tourists to some extent. So we haven't kind of done it in any great detail, but that we can. So that's another one of the things that you can do with the data.
Yes, we could do, because we know where their home parkruns are, we know where they live, so we know how far they've travelled to get to whichever parkrun they have to do. So we could investigate that.
Wow. Fantastic. Can I just say thank you again, both of you. Really, really useful information. We'll try and find a way of
if it's not too many, there's not too many here, but if you want to just email me, and we'll send it out.
We're looking at a site of also of these materials. So
yeah, something like that. Yeah. Sorry, and really, so you can see what's in it. There's a large appendix that goes with it that gives you kind of an idea of all the data. Obviously, it's only summative data, and then we have everything else on QDrive and anonymised. So we're working through GDPR and ethics, and we should be able to share that data and start working on research and papers and that kind of thing.
There was one question I had. So we're working in 4 areas.
4 different.
4 different areas. I wonder if you might just describe what those 4 are. There's the prison.
Oh, sorry. Yes. So we've got. We're also working with HMPP, Her Majesty's Prisons and Probation Service. So there are 25 parkruns in prisons around the world, I think that is. 20 or so in this country, I think there's 1 in Australia, is that right? Ireland probably. So, and that's a really interesting thing. And basically the thing about parkrun in prisons and probation service is it's one of probably the only intervention they've ever found that works both inside and outside of prison. So it's an intervention they feel can have real impact on that particular community. So there's that, there's the GP referral scheme, so there's parkrun practice, so GPs are now starting to refer people to parkrun as an intervention rather than giving them pills. Go to parkrun, I'm prescribing this to you, so social prescribing. Then of course there's junior parkruns, that's a whole different cohort, so the junior parkruns on Sunday morning, they're just 2 kilometres and their ages 4 to 14, right, and parkrun's 5, is that right? Parkrun's 5 upwards, so I think, juniors is 4 to 14. I'm looking for people with kids. So that's a whole cohort on its own, and what's interesting there is we're looking at this kind of longitudinal survey. Parkrun's now been around for 15 years. There are some kind of 5-year-olds who are now 20, there are some 15-year-olds who are now 30. We can do some longitudinal study there. That's 3, what's the 4th one? And then there's both the full cohort. Full cohort, juniors, GP practices, emergency prisons, there's probably something else. There's all these things. We go back to Parkrun and go, oh, we're going to do this. It's great.
That's great. Thanks again, guys.